Welcome to Old Path and our study through the New Testament as we go through these books on Thursdays. We are currently in the book of Revelation. We'll be finishing out the 21st chapter today and getting a chance to see what is the New Jerusalem, and very fascinating passage. And when you first read through it, you might think, oh, it's pretty easy to figure out. And honestly, the things that are seen as controversial really don't change anything. This is one of those chapters that has a lot of room for just going, I wonder if it's this or if it's that, and people love to speculate on some things. And this is one of those passages where I don't have a problem with that we can speculate at some stuff, because it's really only what we're going to be able to see in the visual sense. That's the stuff that people don't necessarily agree on. And I'm good with that. So, people can have differing opinions on this, and it doesn't change anything when it comes to matters of faith and eternity. It's just about what's that place going to look like when we get there, and is there a reason why we get the details? Is there some kind of a deeper meaning to it? And so you'll understand that all when I get there. It's really, again, it's a very fascinating passage. So looking forward to being able to share it with you as we get into it. Couple of things that, again, this is what we have in front of us is a very Jewish picture, and you'll see that as we look at it. And there are some interesting parts just in me saying that. But we are taking a trip there in October, and the trip is starting to fill up now, which is music to my ears. I'm so blessed about that. There's a definite need for tourists to get back there. The nation is very much dependent on tourism, and it's been decimated because of the war. And we want to get back there and support them. So anyway, we're going there, and if it's something that you've maybe put off or procrastinated, but have the intention of going or thinking seriously about it, contact me as soon as you can. You can reserve your place that way and not be on the outside looking in as we get closer. You can do that by coming to the ministry's website, which is oldpaththeology.net, and send me an email through that. I can get you the details. We're going to get to, after we're done with this, there was a horrific event that happened last night in Washington, D.C., and two young people were murdered by a quote, pro-Palestinian activist. When you read the details of it, it is just disgusting in the extreme. But what's already interesting is that I've seen some people, even Christians, trying to play the moral equivalence game. It's like, well, we can be really upset that this guy killed those two young people, but we're not upset because Israel is killing, innocent Palestinians. So there's the what we would consider is the moral equivalence, and I so disagree with that whole thing. And we're going to get into the idea of moral equivalence and what exactly does that mean, and why is it something that we should be concerned about. So moral equivalence, I want to be able to address that a little bit, because we want to be very, very careful about things like that. Moral equivalence, if there is real reason for it, straight across, great. If we're trying to make it say something, moral equivalence, trying to make a point that really doesn't add up, that to me is just a disgusting way of trying to dismiss things that have no business being dismissed. So we'll get to that at the end of the study. But let's get to Revelation chapter 21 today. And I'm fascinated with this. This is really a very, very interesting, very cool section. And a lot of it, we walk away from it, we say we can do our best due diligence to understand this. But in the end, it's really kind of one of those things where we just have to say, it could be this, or it could be that, it could be this, or it could be just kind of insignificant, because it's really not anything at all. You'll understand when I get there, because it has to do about what the place is going to look like, the New Jerusalem, and even the measurements of it. There's disagreement on that. So we'll get into all of it. Really fascinating. So let's have a word of prayer, and let's dig into our text. Father, we thank you so much for the time that we can spend seeking you through your word. We're grateful for what we see here, and we would ask, Lord, that you would help us in our understanding as we read this. The important parts of this we really want to grasp onto. The things that you give us as far as the details of what it's going to look like and how will it be adorned. What's it all going to look like to us? Fascinating in the extreme, and yet for us to try to even conceptualize what this will look like. Clearly, we are not ready for that yet, and we await this time when we will see it with our own eyes, and how we long for the day, seeing you first of all face to face, knowing that this is our future. So we give you all thanks, and we pray, Father, that as we search out you and your word, that we would be just again built up and edified that we would be challenged to walk rightly before you, just knowing the times of the seasons and the days in which we live, being careful about our walk with you and making you known to this world. So we give you all thanks and pray that you'd be glorified. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and read the text in this. We start at verse 9. And we'll finish out the chapter mainly because there's a lot of information here that we read it, we can have some kind of an understanding, but there's just not any way that we can really know for sure. Because it's like you're being shown by description some place that you haven't seen with your own eyes. But we can do that in some places around the world. I try to do that with Israel. Telling the people that are on the tour, when I talk with them, we do a meeting before the trip happens, and I try to describe a lot of things. But you have no appreciation for it until you see it with your own eyes. What we are being described here, the world's never seen anything remotely close to this. It is unimaginable. So it's really hard for us to fully wrap our minds around what we're seeing here. We believe it, but when we see it and actually see it in all of its glory, there's no way that we would ever in this world at this time be able to conceptualize what we're going to read here. So let's read verse 9 and then through the end of the chapter. It says, "Now, one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls filled with the 7 last plagues came to me and talked with me, saying, 'Come, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife.' And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her light was like the most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Also, she had a great and high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates, and the names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel, and 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, and of them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he who talked with me had a gold reed to measure the city, its gates, and its wall. The city was laid out in a square. Its length was as great as its breadth, and he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs its length, its breadth, its height, they're all equal. Then he measured its wall 144 cubits according to the measure of a man, that is, of an angel. The construction of the wall was jasper. The city was pure gold, like clear glass. The foundations of the wall of the city are adorned with all kinds of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, fifth sardix, sixth sardius, seventh chrysolite. The 8th was beryl, the 9th topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. I've probably said some of those wrong. I don't know if I'd even notice these things when I see them. And we'll get to that too, by the way. So it says the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each individual gate was of 1 pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold like transparent glass. But I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city had no need of sun or moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it, and the Lamb was its light. The nations of those who are saved shall walk in its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory and honor into it. Its gates shall not be shut by day or by day, and there is no night there. So that means they're always open. And they will bring glory and honor to the nations of the nations into it. But there shall by no means enter anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. And so, wow, the description of this is nothing short of astounding and mind-blowing. Now, the details of this, it's an interesting thing. It sounds like it should be pretty easy to figure out. Okay, we get it, stones, we get the idea of the length of things, but when you start to read what people try to figure out of this, man, there are a lot of different ways that people view this. And it's fascinating. And again, since we're not told with absolute certainty on some of these details, we can't know for sure. But there are some things that we need to really, really understand here. There is a theology within the church, and some churches hold to what is known as replacement theology. And replacement theology simply goes, if I'm going to do it in the most general sense, the promises that were made to Israel because of their rejection of Jesus, their Messiah, all of those promises were kind of made null and void and then given to the church. And I know that's a very broad generalization, and you'll have a lot of people that would probably not agree fully with that definition, but to make it easy, just in big round figures, that's a pretty straightforward. Israel had to, they basically forfeited that because of their rejection of Messiah. So there are some who believe that. I absolutely reject it wholeheartedly and absolutely. But nonetheless, that is what some people believe. So with that being said, when we read this, you find out that there are things that are shown to correspond to the names of the disciples, or the apostles, and then also the names of the children of Israel. So that's an important thing, that when you get to this forever kingdom in the New Jerusalem, there will be side by side, there will be the names of the apostles and the names of the 12 tribes. So that's amazing to me, and it's such an important matter for us to understand, that what we will have is a reminder of the covenants that God has made with man. So the covenant that God made with the nation of Israel by the descendants, the children or the sons of Jacob or Israel. And so that would be the 12 that we know of. And so we'll get into that. But then also the other covenant, the one that is made in Jesus's blood, there's also the representation of those 12 apostles. And there's the big discussion about, well, which apostles are we talking about? 11 are settled, but there's that one. Who's going to be representing that last, or the 12? So we'll get into all the different options on these things. And again, it is so fascinating, and I absolutely love this stuff. So if we were to spend our entire life trying to figure the little finer details of this out, and we finally come to a conclusion, after all my years of exhaustive research, this is what I believe it to be, and we get there just to find out, no, it was the other option. Again, there's so much, and we'll get into it in the course of the study. But this is just, again, such a wonderful, wonderful thing. So, chapter 21, verse 9. There is, in this first verse, there is something really, really interesting that's said here. And the first thing that you read, you might want to go, wait a minute, how is that not a conflict? So we read this in verse 9. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls filled with the 7 last plagues came to me and talked with me. That part's not difficult. We know that there was each one of the bowls of the last of the judgments that were poured out were being poured out by an individual angel. This one goes unnamed. It just says it's one of the 7. And so he said, come with me. And so he says, come, and I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. Well, that's kind of an interesting thing, because the bride is a different word than what we have for the wife that is known as the church from chapter 19. So when we read this word right here in 19, where it talks about this bride, this is numphen is the word for it, and it's kind of like that one that's betrothed. It's the maiden. It's not, this is my wife. That's the one that is to be given to me. And so when we look at the other, where it talks about in chapter 19, where it talks about the bride being the church, that's gune. So where you hear gynecological, it's, that's wife. It's the female, and so it identifies as one already given in marriage. But this bride, known as the city, is as a bride presented, because Jesus is not going to be marrying 4 walls. He's already been given in marriage. So the issue here is that it's one of symbolic. It's been prepared for him, and that's how it will look, a bride that's being presented to the one who has made it all possible, that's going to be marrying this bride. In Jesus' case, there is no new Jerusalem, there's no new heavens, new earth, if it's not for the fact that he conquers sin and death. So these are things prepared for him because he's done these things that has made it possible. So at this point, he's already been given in marriage and been married to the bride, the church, for over 1,000 years. We were there with him for the entirety of the millennium, those 1,000 years. This is after all of that. And now what we see is that the angel takes him. Now here's an interesting thing. John is told that he's going to be shown something. And we see that in verse 10 where it says, "So he carried me away in the spirit to a great high mountain, and then he showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God." The imagery here is basically identical to chapter 17. And that's when he's taken away to a high mountain and he's seen Babylon the Great. He's seeing this mystery, Babylon the Great. And so he's able to see her in the same way. In the spirit, taken to a high mountain, looking down at the city. And the first one is the one that's filled with corruptions, the abominations of the earth. She's the mother of harlotries and all that stuff. Everything that could be the complete polar opposite, all of the filth and all of the wickedness and evil, is rivaled on the other complete extreme by John being able to be taken again by the Spirit to a high mountain to look down, or to look at a city that's actually coming down out, already prepared. Interesting thing, this city is already built and completed when it comes down. So when he sees Babylon, that's already the creation of man. Man's created that, and all of the wickedness and the evil. In this case, God is saying, I have already prepared a new heaven and a new earth. Now there's a new Jerusalem. And as he sees it in all of its splendor, already created. It's already been fabricated, built, and it's just going to come and be placed on the earth. So this is what he sees. He's shown all of these little bits and pieces. So he showed me this great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven. So as he looks, it's already in the stages of coming down. So we think of a city and all the rest of it until you see the dimensions, and you just go, how do I wrap my mind around this? Now, here's what it says. Now, this city had the glory of God. Her light was like a most precious stone. It was like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. So what he sees here, all he can do is his best of just saying, it's made, and when you read all the descriptions, it's made entirely of things that are of immense value, even in small portions here on this earth. This is an entire city that's adorned with all of this stuff from one end to the other. When you see the size of the city, you just go, yeah, well, when you're God, you can make it any way that you want to, but to build something like this, there is not enough natural resources on our planet. If you could grab all of everything that would be like this and put it in one place, you couldn't build this city. There's not enough of it. So God makes it out of whole cloth. It's a new heaven and a new earth. And then all the stuff that people see as being the most valuable things, metals, jewels, all the stuff that is just a visible representation of what is enormous wealth, and that only people who have that kind of wealth can afford such things. God just uses it as a way of just saying those things that people are seeing as so valuable, God's going to make a city out of it that we can be a part of. So it's intended to be splendid in ways that we can't really fully grasp. That's all that we can do is take away from this and go, you've got to be kidding me. And it's God basically saying the things that people put such value in, yeah, you're going to see it in its perfection. I'm going to build an entire city out of it. When you see this, again, size of the city, you just marvel at it. So here's what we're told. It's descending out of heaven as he sees it. And then verse 11, it had the glory of God and her light was like. So those things that were illuminated, or the things that reflected, if you will, the light, this is the first of them. And they're all going to be doing the same thing. And we're going to get to that light source in a moment because we're told what that is. I've already read it, but I know we read the whole thing, and you might not stop long enough to look verse by verse if this is your first time studying through it. So then verse 12 tells us this. Now, also she, speaking of this Jerusalem, had a great and high wall with 12 gates. And the 12 gates, and 12 angels who stood at the gates, and the names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. So what you're going to see is that now since there's a north, south, and east and west kind of an orientation, what we're going to find is that since the names are there, if you've done a study through the Old Testament, you're going to go, yeah, you know what? When they actually were in the wilderness, they were camped out around the tabernacle that was there, and they fanned out in all four directions from the tabernacle in the wilderness, where the Levites were in the middle, and then the other tribes were around the outside. Now, as we read on a little bit more, it tells us now the three gates on the east, there was 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations. Now, so let's deal first of all with verse 12, because it's, again, one of those fascinating things. So, if there's names mentioned, and there's 12 of them that are mentioned, but there's 4 sides to it, that means 3 tribes per side. Now, if you're kind of geeky, and when it comes to all the Bible stuff like that, you say, well, which one is it going to be? Is it going to be of the 12 tribes that left from Egypt? Is that what it's going to be? Or the ones who went into it, I should say? Or is it going to be the other ones as they encamped in the wilderness? Because here's what happened. In the wilderness, you find that the ones that are there, and I wrote them down because I think it's just, to me, it's kind of an interesting thing. I'm sorry, my notes are in a different place. I didn't keep them all. Oh, man. Anyway, you can look it up yourself. Here's what you can do, because I remember where the passage is. But when you look at the encampment in the wilderness, when they came out at the Exodus, in the middle of it, around the tabernacle, were the Levites, the priests, right? So that would say, what you would say is, well, but there were 12 tribes, so how could there be 12 tribes if you've got the 13th in the middle? That doesn't quite work. Or if you say Levi was taken away from the 12, that's only 11, but there had to be 12. If you go and read that from Exodus, you'll remember that Joseph is not represented as a tribe. Instead, it's his 2 sons. And that's why we have Ephraim and Manasseh. Those were Joseph's 2 sons born to him in Egypt. So that gives you that Manasseh and Ephraim were actually on one of the sections, facing north, south, east, and west. And you can see it. It's actually there. Then there is what you get in at the end of Ezekiel 48, and it tells us about the temple that is there in the city layout that we get in Ezekiel 48, and it tells us about the tribes that are there, and it goes back to the original sons of Jacob, where there is no Ephraim and Manasseh, because Joseph is the representative. So the temple that's there in the city and the names of the tribes are different for the millennium than they are for the forever kingdom. And again, that's fascinating to me, or so it would appear. So again, the question is it the exact same or is it different? Which tribes are represented on the names of at the gates and on each one of the sides? So you just go, it's an amazing thing to stop to try to consider. What's this going to look like? What I want to make sure that we understand, let's read it again, where it tells us that there are 12 gates, so 1 for each of the names, right? So you would figure a long wall times 4 and 3 gates per wall, each one representing the tribes. So the question would be, once again, is the inside going in, is that to be represented by what was the Levites? That's where Jesus will be. The Father will be there with us. We're going to read about that. So would that be the allotment to Levi, and to the Levites rather, and then the other 12 are like what we saw in the wilderness? Or, since there's no formal place of worship, there wouldn't be a reason for the Levites to be inside the gates, so they could be put back on the outside, and they would be the original 12 sons of Jacob. And I tend to favor that one, which is really kind of interesting. And then that would mean ultimately that what we're talking about is the same representation that you saw in the millennial kingdom would be the same that we would have here. Because again, it goes back to the original. Who were the first 12? And of those 12, you had Joseph, not Ephraim and Manasseh. That was after, that was in the Exodus. So again, people can disagree on this. This is again one of those things I'm saying. You can look at all the possibilities, the two possibilities. Is it like it was at the Exodus, or is it like what it was during the millennium from Ezekiel 48? Which describes the millennial, the 1,000-year kingdom that we've just come out of in the book of Revelation. So if this is not clear to you, please ask questions on the YouTube or send me an email, and I'll make sure that I'm trying to make it as clear and easy to understand as possible. But the potentials is, again, it's interesting, and people can speculate on this. If we are convinced of one or the other and turns out that we're wrong, no harm done. Because God doesn't tell us here, it's not one of those things that we must absolutely have straight. Now, 3 gates on the east, on the north, on the south, and on the west, and the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and of them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Now that's interesting, because the foundations is what you build it upon. So the question would be, what does that mean? Are there like rows of these? Or is it the space between the gates, including the corners? You'd get to 12, right? So what you would have on the gates is the name of the tribes, and on the foundations is the names of the apostles. So again, 11 of those are not in doubt. But of the original 12 apostles was Judas. Do we really expect Judas's name to be on the foundations? So that leaves us 2 options. Is it Matthias, the one that they chose after the death of Judas? Or is he passed over entirely and Paul becomes that name or that apostle? So again, you could say, well, even of the original 12, some of them are very, very prominent, of course, right? Because when you think about Peter, James, and John, big deal. Those are very prominent people. In this case, we just don't simply know if Judas would be excluded, which would make sense. I would tend to believe that that's the case. But Matthias, that we know about him, his time, we don't know much about it. I mean, there's not much mention of him. He would have been around to see Jesus. He would have seen him resurrected. So he met all the requirements that we get from Acts chapter 1, but we don't know much about him. But we know that Paul identifies himself as an apostle, but born out of due season, means after the fact. Well, would Paul qualify as an apostle? Because he had to have seen the risen Jesus. Well, clearly he did. Acts chapter 9. Plus he tells us in Galatians that he spent 3 years being instructed directly by the Lord himself. So, would he qualify? Absolutely. Does he have the credentials? Does he meet the basic requirements? Yes. Does he have the credentials? Probably as much as any of the apostles could ever hope to have. Look at how much God did through him among the Gentiles, and how much of the Bible that we have that's basically his writings. So again, here's my opinion. My heart wants to say Paul should have a place there. But if we're going to be really honest, like what we saw with chapter 48, and we want to go back to the original, Matthias' name would be there. He was that 12th. He was the one who took Judas's place. But if it turns out that he had Paul there, or if we had Matthias/Paul, that's not what the Bible tells us. So I'm just kind of laughing about it. Who's going to be that 12th? Again, it'll be the same. When we see it, we'll go, oh, so it was Paul or Matthias, or I don't know how, but even Judas. Would be the same thing about as we go through the gates. Okay, Joseph has his own gate, so then also does Levi, and not just Levi and then, no Levi, no Joseph, but Ephraim and Manasseh. Again, speculate. People love to have some fun with that one. And again, we could have a wonderful dialogue on this, and however it turns out, it's not a right or wrong kind of a thing. It's just interesting. So, as we get to verse 15. So the one who talked with me, and he talked with me, this angel, and he had a golden reed to measure the city and its gates and its walls. So all of the things, he wants us to understand how big this place is. And so there's a reed. It's a thing to measure with. Now, the reed doesn't tell us, really where we're going to go with this. Wait till you find this out. The city is laid out in a square. So that much we absolutely know. let's just this is the city. So if there's a city, there's walls to it. We've already been told that because there's gates. So we have no reason to think that the gates and the walls are any different in their dimensions. So the walls would be as long as the city would be. And there's the question about, are the walls as high up as they are long? Or, yeah, you'll see here in just a moment. So the city is laid out as a square, and its length is as great as its breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. Its length, breadth, and height are all equal. So all sides of it. So it's as tall as it is wide. Now the question is, and some people would want to look at this, if you don't even know how long a furlong is, it depends on even the measurement about that. So I'll give you the two options. The question is it this length of furlongs, is that it from one end to the other, and then you divide it by 4, so it's not as, not in one line as it one, and that this way another, or so. Here, let me just give you the numbers in round figures. Depending on the length of a furlong, it is at minimum about 1,350 miles. At the length or the longer of it, it could be as much as 1,500 miles. Now, does that mean it's 1,500 miles in one direction, or is it 15 divided by 4? So one wall is 375, another wall 375, and make the circuit, but it would also be as tall as it is, or as long as it is, it's also tall. So that's the walls. Now, when you hear this, you go, it's got to be a misprint. There's got to be a mistranslation in this. No city is that big. Who can build a wall that big? Let's stop for just a moment and say, this is the new heaven and the new earth, and God made it. So dimensions are not an issue for him. And we're not trying to fit it in the United States because it's a new heaven and a new earth. So put away all the things that we say, or we might think it's impossible. In this world, sure, nobody could build that. The Great Wall of China is hard to imagine its length, and it gets to be about, when you stop to think about how long the Great Wall of China, but it's nothing like this. Because at minimum, if it's 375 miles in one direction, it's also 375 tall. So it's like, oh my gosh, how do you work your head around that? So the other option is that if it's the longer of the two potentials, 1,500 miles in times 4, then think about this. I now live in Texas. And so if you were to draw a line 1,500 miles from my east to west, it would be starting on the west coast of where we came from, of California, and it would extend all the way to basically the border of Texas and Louisiana in one direction. And then it would go up into Canada. And so the size of this thing is immense. If you're trying to figure out how far it is from top to bottom, it would be like going from Miami to Detroit, Michigan. So when I say this, it's like the length and the size of this is absurd. And once again, there's not enough raw material on the planet to make this. So that's why we can put it out of our minds and say, no way this could be constructed. Well, unless you're God. And so if he can speak the universe into existence, this is small potatoes. And none of it was a labor for him. He could just do it in a moment, no problem. So and so let me just say this part. If I had a detractor here who doesn't believe in the things of the Bible, they want to say, so you expect me to believe that you believe that this is even possible? And if they would say that as the scoffer, I would say, well, yeah, it's not a problem. I mean, how big is your God? If somehow the one that you would ever worship as God has limitations, he's not God. So when I read this, I go, this is going to be grand. It's not, how's he going to do that? He's going to do that because he's God. This is no big deal. He's the creator of the universe. So when he goes to do this, I would expect it to be immense, and I would expect it to be like the world's never seen before, and to be so extravagant so as to defy explanation. He's grand himself. He's beyond words. So the idea that he would create something for us to see in which he would dwell, of course it's going to be beyond imagination. So we can read this, but brothers, sisters, this is beyond imagination. This is mind-blowing stuff. Now, as we read on, it says, the walls themselves, and then he measured its wall, 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of an angel. And again, is it the 18 or the 24-inch cubit? So it's at minimum like 220 feet or more. And that would just be the only thing I can figure on this, because we've already been told what the length and the height of it is. So is that just how wide it is? That, that amount of feet? That's basically like 2/3 of a football field wide. So again, if people start to look at this, well, wait a minute, I know construction, and a wall that's 1,500 miles tall can't only be that much wide. It couldn't stand on its own. Again, God made it, so it's not falling down anyway. Quit thinking like a human. Think of like an eternal human, and that God doesn't have the limitations. Again, so we're given these details, and it's like, yeah, I mean, I can see the big part of it, but how this all works, it's really kind of hard to fully wrap your mind around. Well, it tells us in verse 18, now the construction of its wall was of jasper, and the city was pure gold like clear glass. So these are things that do not exist for us. Jasper is a stone, but the idea that you could make something out of it that would be much larger in feet and in size. I mean, think about that. Read again. The construction of its wall. What's it made out of? It's made out of jasper. It's not like God has a bunch of concrete delivered and he puts it in forms and puts it up. He makes this out of precious stone. And if that's not enough, he makes the city itself out of pure gold like clear glass. Now the foundations of the wall of the city, they were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. Now the question of adorned, is there something else? Is it because it's made of glass and these stones are inlaid with it? That seems to be more, because it's adorned with it. And we've already been told that the city's made of gold. Now, are the foundations somehow different? And the foundations, is that just meaning it's that section that's between the gates? Again, this is all very hard for us to try to fully grasp. And again, you can have a lot of different options on this. And so trying to picture what it's like, the foundations are something different. When we think of foundation on a house, the last thing we want is that foundation to be made of different things. We want it to be one slab of whatever it is. In this case, it is of different things. It represents different precious stones. So these foundations, the foundations, plural, of the wall of the city were what the walls sat upon. Again, trying to picture this in our minds, I don't know that we can really fully do it. We're just being given descriptions as he's best able to relay them to us. So the question would be, is it the foundation that the city sits on, or is it the foundation that the walls sit upon? So is there something just underneath them? And if that's the case, then we've already been told what they represent, but here's what they look like. The construction of the wall was of jasper, and the city was of pure gold like glass. That tells you about the buildings or the city itself. But the foundations of the wall of the city, they were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. The first foundation was, and it goes through this whole list of those. Now again, remember, the corresponding foundations go along with the apostles. But when you start to think about the stones and it lays them out, more than likely you're kind of thinking of this too. Wait, wasn't the high priest, didn't he have a breastplate, and it was of all of the stones that represented the 12 tribes? And are these the same kind of stones? The trouble that we have with that is the Hebrew to Greek. Now, some people would be able to say, well, can we go back and look at the Septuagint? And the Septuagint, because it's Greek, does it correspond, the breastplate of the high priest, with what we have as the description here? And again, you can get into people that will speculate on all this stuff, but it becomes a controversy. And again, the idea that you would have the 12 stones that represented the 12 tribes that were on the breastplate of the high priest, we've already been told that the foundations are the names of the apostles. So you'll get people to get into all kinds of disagreement on this, and honestly, it's probably not worth trying to figure out and getting into an argument, because we're just not given enough information here. But nonetheless, very, very interesting that these are, many of them are exactly the same, but not all of them. So, if people want to undertake trying to do a straight across comparison, you can do that. Now, the 12 gates, now here's another one of those things where you go, that's impossible. The 12 gates were 12 pearls. So we can think pearls. We know what those are. We know where they come from. But these gates would be pretty massive, you would think, because the walls are unimaginably huge. But these things, they're made out of pearl. Each individual gate was of one pearl. So the first thing you want to think is, how big was that oyster? So let's just remember, God didn't need to make an oyster big enough to make that big of a pearl. He just made it that big of a pearl. Let's just leave it at that. So each one was, again, the idea, it was one pearl, and the street of the city were pure gold like transparent glass, which is very similar to what we heard about the city itself. And this reminds me, every time I read this, when I first walked into Calvary Chapel of Cyprus, it's 39 years ago, roughly. And I don't think it was all that long into my time there that I remember hearing my pastor teaching on this passage. And when he got to this point, you know, people love to say this, and maybe some of you that are believers have heard, we're going to walk on streets paved in gold, you know, that kind of thing about the glory of the kingdom and all that stuff. Jack said that, but he had a different take on the whole thing. Because he said, you know, when you think about what you see described here and the grandeur of it, the idea that you have a city made of gold and the walls, the foundations, it's impossible to wrap your mind around. This you can kind of see, you know, we know what a street looks like. We know what streets are made for. People walk on them, or in our case, drive. We're not going to have cars, but we're walking on these things, right? So, and if for somebody said, well, there's nothing that says that we don't have cars, they're not needed. So, and besides, that would just do nothing but create problems. I don't need to go down that road. Anyhow, so we have streets here that are clear as transparent. They're clear, transparent, perfect, and they're transparent gold. So Jack said something to the effect of, isn't it an amazing thing that something that is so sought after, people will basically either fight wars, live and die trying to get it, or they will put their lives in peril trying to extract it out of the ground. And he says this stuff is unlike anything that man has ever seen. It's identified as gold, but it is so absolutely pure and free of any kind of impurities that it's transparent and it's like glass. So it's something that mankind has never ever seen, and it's so grand, but God uses it for pavement, which is just a way of saying the kingdom will be probably fitting for the king. And so the idea that he would be able to make streets of gold, no one's ever imagined trying to do that. God says, let me make it one better. I'll make it so pure that you can see through it, and I'll use it for streets. My God is wonderful, and he does such things. So, look at this. I saw no temple in it. Why? For the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. Now, here's an interesting thing. Why would there not be a formal place of worship? Because that's what the temple would be. And think about this. When God said build a temple, even if it's a tabernacle in the wilderness or the temple itself, it was still a place where God says, I will be there. In fact, look at this. Turn with me to the Ezekiel passage that I had referenced a little bit earlier. Let's take a look at Ezekiel chapter 48. Ezekiel 48. Look at the last verse in this, because this is the description of the millennial city. And so all the way around it, verse 35, the last verse, all the way around it shall be 18,000 cubits, and the name of the city in that day, it will be the Lord is there. Wow. See, that's during the millennium. Now we have the forever, and the way that it will be known is that that's where God is. But there's no place where it would be God would be there, and there's no way for everyone to be getting in there. In fact, when it came to the Holy of Holies, one guy once a year could go in during the time of the temple, and that would be the high priest. Here, there's no building that's the temple. We have direct access to God, and he is among his creation. So there's no need for a temple because God's just in the midst of all of his creation, all of those who are redeemed. Man, I look at the stuff going on in the world, and it can sometimes be almost more than you could really kind of all take in. Picture this, you guys, picture it. The idea that there won't even be a formal place of worship because the one that we would worship, there's no need for that formality because he's right there in front of you the whole time. There's no barrier to him. You're in his midst. He's in your midst. There's direct fellowship at all times with all who are there. Awesome. Saw no temple, and the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb were its temple, and the city had no need of the sun or of the moon. And there's a little bit of a disagreement on some people. Does that mean that there is no moon, there's no sun? Or is it just that they're there, but there's no need for them because whatever illumination they could provide, there's a greater source than them? So could there still be a sun in the sky and a moon that's there? Who knows? Potentially, you can have people go ahead and disagree on that. No big deal. What we cannot disagree on is what we're told that we do know for sure. The city had no need for it. So it didn't have to be there because there's no need for it like we have currently. Doesn't mean that it's not there. And again, people can disagree on that. But there's no sun or moon, no need for sun or moon to shine, for the glory of God illuminates it, and the Lamb is its light. So what radiates from God, and Jesus in particular, is enough to illuminate everything. Not just the city, but other places as well. He has to be. So people would say, well, curvature of the earth. And for the flat earth people, they could say, see, the earth's flat anyway. This is the new heaven and the new earth. So let's quit with all that. The idea that there's no need for any external light source because he then is that source of light. Now I tend to be of the opinion that it's 1,500 miles in every direction. The city's made of gold. There's these precious stones. The walls are jasper, and embedded in the foundations are these other stones, and Jesus produces the light source. Can you imagine what that's going to look like in just the spectacular color that radiates from this city is going to be unimaginable. I mean, just unimaginable. But the idea that he radiates this light, and I find this to be really an interesting thing. And again, I can't prove it, but how amazing is this, that I believe the same radiating light from him is what Paul would have seen in Acts chapter 9 when Jesus appears and speaks with him. That light, more than likely, well, we do know that he was blinded after it, and that he needed to be supernaturally healed because he was blinded. But the light was there, and so much so that he couldn't even see. Well, is that giving us a glimpse of what it'll be like when Jesus comes back and we see him as Paul would have seen him, because he's resurrected and glorified and back to his splendor that he had before he took on that body of flesh and blood? Are we seeing him as Paul would have seen him and as he has always been, that light radiates from him? He said he's the light of the world in John chapter 8, and that anybody who walks in him will not walk in darkness. And that means that, your eyes will be opened in the spiritual sense, but could it mean even more than that, in that he radiates light? Well, clearly he does here. Is that what he meant also part of chapter 8? Well, you can make the case, but here we definitely know that light emanates from him. So it tells us, and the nations of those who are saved, they will walk in its light, the light of the city. And the kings of the earth will bring glory and honor into it. Now, how amazing is this? That means that there are people outside of this city that are dwelling. And again, it's so hard for us to try to imagine eternity, because again, we think of it as not like being on a surface like what we have on the earth. Well, yeah, there is. So how do we, and again, if everybody is worshiping and that's all, then they would all be around the temple. But it tells me that the kings of the nations will be coming into the city. They're outside that 1,500-mile radius. How else do you describe them coming in? So the existence that is being spoken of here in the eternal sense is beyond our ability to fully grasp. What will life be like? And what will our day-to-day experience, if you will? And so everybody would say, well, it's not a day-to-day experience because there's no day-to-day cycle. There's really not a need for a sun and a moon. There's constant illumination. We're not getting older. There's all the different things that people can go ahead and disagree over. But the long and the short of it is, There's a place that we dwell, and even in a city that could be 1,500 miles square, you've got people that are living outside of it, and these people that are coming from other places. So they'll bring their glory, their recognition of who they are. They come and they will pay homage, or however you want to say, their worship, whoever they are, and of whatever existence they are, they bring that before the Lord. It's the recognition of who he is rather than them. Its gates will not be shut at all by day, and there will be no night there. So it's not the normal cycle of things. They will bring the glory and their honor of the nations into it. So read that and try to wrap your mind around it as much as you possibly can. You're just going to say, the existence that's being described to us here, we can't fully grasp it. What would be and I say day-to-day knowing that it's not day-to-day in the way we think of it, but what's the day-to-day of life during that time? I don't know. I'm not told enough. But it does seem like there are people who live outside this enormous city who come and go in through its gates. And it tells us this. This is so cool. Verse 27. There shall by no means enter anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. So the question that comes from this, you go, well, wait a minute. There's not going to be anything that comes into the city or through its gates, but does that mean that they're there? Is there something outside of the city that could cause that? And of course, to me, it's not one of the things that are saying, well, there's the potential that those things could be, but they won't be allowed in the city. You can look at it a completely different way. Since they will not be there, anyone like that is already in the lake of fire and have been for that time. At the end of 1,000 years, they're no longer around. This is a way of saying, well, of course they're not allowed in because they're not even there. The only people who are there are the ones that are in the Lamb's book of life, and the other ones are in the lake of fire. There's no way that they can come back over. So we don't worry about there being a corruption that happens kind of after the fact. It just won't be the case. So this is the forever kingdom. And the description of it is, again, it's breathtaking to try to wrap your mind around, even in some small way, just how fabulous this is. So we'll pick up at chapter 22 next week, and we'll be concluding it. It'll probably take us a couple of weeks to get through chapter 22. We'll see how it goes. We're already into this, by the way. I looked it up. I had to find out. We're already into this study in Revelation for over a year now, if you can imagine that. It's crazy how much time it takes to get through a book. But this is one of those books that's so wonderful, you don't rush through it anyway. But yeah, we're into it for more than a year, if you can imagine that. All right. So I wanted to deal with this idea of moral equivalence, and the idea that you could look at a particular situation, and if you're trying to defend something that you see, you want to say, well, whoever it is that may be the one who's basically wronged, well, they had some level of culpability for what has happened to them. And this came up in a discussion, and it's not just with one person, but you'll find all kinds of people who are doing it. But what happened last night, and how these two young people were gunned down, unaware of what was going on. They were just innocent people. They were soft targets. They were easy targets, and a very, very evil man came and just took their lives. We saw it happen last night in Washington, D.C. Two Jewish young people about to be engaged. They were going back to Jerusalem next week, I'm sorry. And they were going to go through the formal part of giving, their engagement. And it's wonderful. And you see the two of them, what I've heard, and I haven't had a chance to see it for myself, but multiple people have said they were professing messianic believers. So these were Jewish people who believed in Jesus Messiah. And if that's the case, I rejoice. Not that their lives were taken, well before they ever should have been, but they've gone to their reward, and they're living in the very presence of the God that we're reading about here. So if there's one little bit of good news that's come out of it, we know where they are. So that was a bit of news that I heard today, which I thought was great. So anyway, the guy who did this is typical of like what we're seeing in the college campus protests. He's using all the same slogans, wearing the same ridiculous kufiya that they all wear, and he's just He's basically the poster child for all of what you've seen there, but he took it to the next level. So the people who get into moral equivalence, it's like, well, I understand that this is really bad, but there's always that caveat of, the people who were injured were also culpable to some extent, which is just ridiculous because regardless of whether they were people who were supporters of Israel or anything else, that does not mean that they should have ever been a target. So whenever I hear the moral equivalence, I'm so disgusted by it because it's just a ridiculous thing to say. And here's why. If we're going to play the moral equivalence, because of course they were saying, well, look at all the innocent people whose lives have been taken by Israel and during, ever since October the 7th. Well, if we're playing that silly game of moral equivalence, then we would want to basically be saying, okay, if we're going to take a look at this person who did this and the two young people. And remember, as I'm saying all of this, my problem is with moral equivalence of any kind if there's no way to say it's a straight across example. In this case, it is so far from it. So anybody trying to make the case, to me, is just an absolute fool. And if that offends people, I can't help that. But to me, to make that case is just, that's the height of ridiculous. So here would be, if it's going to be a quote equivalence, their lives were taken, but the people that they're representing, Israel, is taking the lives of people in the same way. Hardly. Because if that was the case, then the person who perpetrated what happened last night would have to be the aggrieved, following the types, and that would mean that the two young people that he took out of this world, that he didn't know, would have had to have been like broken into his parents' house and took their lives, and no, he's doing this in retaliation for them. That would be the moral equivalence. Well, they would have to then be guilty of whatever it is that he felt was necessary that their lives should be taken. That obviously never happened. So the idea that you could start to play that game of moral equivalence is insanity. Take it one step further than that. When you start to think about the people who have lost their lives in the area around Gaza, remember the people who perpetrated what had happened on October the 7th, they live among the people and use them as human shields. But remember, Israel will always tell the people, hey, we're coming, it's best that you get out. Remember, this has been going on for a year and a half now, since Israel went in and started to try to root out what's going on with Hamas. And we don't know the numbers of actual civilian casualties, but let's face it, there's about 2 million people that live in Gaza, and the fatalities, according to Hamas, is in the tens of thousands or in the 40,000 range, according to them. But they're about as trustworthy as the evening news. So do I trust their numbers? And even if I try to trust their numbers, it doesn't account for the people who were the combatants that were taken out. But Israel takes incredible measures to try to minimize the amount of civilian casualties, but the cowards that did what they did live among the people. And we have to remember the numbers here. There's about 1,200 people that were murdered on October the 7th. If we were to try to understand that in terms that we get it here in our country, given the relative difference between populations, it would be like within the matter of a few hours, more than 50,000 people of our population were taken out of existence because people came over the border. Figure Canada or Mexico, those are our only borders. And can you imagine how our reaction would be if somebody did that in a matter of a couple of hours, took out 50,000 of our citizens here in this country? What would be our response, especially if the people who did that went and lived among the people that are just the civilians? We would do all that we could to try to make sure that those people knew that we're coming after the bad guys who did this, but we can't rest because they'll just do it again. So again, if we're trying to play this ridiculous thing about moral equivalence, fine. If you want to talk about how Israel has done what they've done since October the 7th and you've got some kind of a grievance, that's fine, bring it up. But to try to take a look at what happened last night and find in any way any kind of moral equivalence, you're making a fool of yourself, because there's nothing there. It's apples to oranges. So it's one of those things I've always found that moral equivalence is never usually done rightly. It's trying to make an excuse for the actions of some by looking at the actions of others. means that you're not taking enough weight and putting it on the people who've done real evil, and then you're overinflating the actions of someone else to try to make a justification for things. So the one thing that we as believers never want to get into is the idea of moral equivalence. Morality and the actions of some need to stand on their own. And to try to find justification for why somebody did what they did, if it's not legitimate reason and justification, we got to quit making excuses for people. And if they've done something that's truly evil, don't try to find a cause for it aside from their own evil, but don't look for somebody outside that should be the cause for it. And if only not for those people, everything would have been different. We know better than that. So we want to stay away from moral equivalence, especially in things like this. Again, when I started to read some of the things from a number of people, it's predictable, but it just is so absolutely dishonest. And hopefully people do realize how dishonest it is and then maybe recalculate. But to sit back and try to play that game is just, to me, it's just dishonest. It's foolishness, and it makes absolutely no sense. So we will be picking up next week in chapter 22. Any questions on the study itself or on the idea of moral equivalence? Contact me. Love to hear from you. oldpaththeology.net is the website, and I'd love to hear from you. So you can contact me through the email at the website, and we'll pick up at chapter 22 next week.